Alrighty, well, hello everybody. Welcome back to Too Many Casts. Too Many Casts is a podcast where we basically, just like any other podcast, are a bunch of dude bros or dude sisters saying dumb shit, with the added exception that at some point throughout the middle of the podcast, I'm going to have the guest here list off, not getting too deep, however, one thing that they think there's too much of in the world. Hence, like how there's too many fucking podcasts in the world today. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the guest. Just kidding. Let's have the guest introduce themselves. How are you
Uh,
today, sir?
I'm good. I'm Max Marcellus, New York-based
Max has a
film
bit of an
person,
echo.
all around
Nobody tell him. He's got a
uh,
bit of an echo.
history buff, I would
Shh.
say. I think history buff is probably the best thing to describe me. But yeah, I do film. I've worked on some like major films, but also like I'm a cinematographer and I do my indie stuff whenever I get the chance to. So thanks for having me on, and let's see how this goes.
Oh yeah, totally, totally. Cause yeah, this is a revamp. Episodes 1 and 2 are kind of a obviously as any first and second episodes go a bit of a map onto this third episode, but this third episode is going to be very different. So um, yeah, Max. So let's see. So just jump right in here. I got like a little like script right here. We obviously go way back,
Yeah.
like to old YouTube,
Oh yeah.
2000 around 2009.
Yep.
Yeah.
Do you remember that what was it, that Sonic cast that we did?
Yes. Um, and actually, I have no idea how this happened, but a while back, I came upon a YouTube channel that was, again, it was another one of mine that I had no idea I made, and excuse me.
That's what I want to be when I'm
Random
like
time skip,
in my
random time
30s, and then
skip.
I was like, oh well, maybe not. But I, I'm glad. It's mostly like honestly, it's not like any like animosity towards anyone. It's mostly, I don't know if you remember the great Kickstarter debacles, right? Where everyone's abridged series was in need of immediate funding for a brand new gaming PC so that they could, spit out the episodes faster, even though they had the tools all along. And then they'd be
Yeah.
like, okay, hey, thanks for the crowdfunding, and never come back with an episode. I think Bleacher Bridge was probably the most infamous for that. If you like, there were like multiple rounds of funding there that just never went anywhere. I think Bleacher Bridge ended at like episode 7 or something. Um,
Oh wow.
essentially. And Laney Pator, who I still to this day I think is probably one of the funniest people I've ever like just seen on the internet. He always sounded a little bit like Chris Jericho to me, which I thought was hilarious. Um, but yeah, like he had a similar thing where he was like, "All right, Yu Yu Hakusho Bridge is coming back, and now I'm a content creator." And we're like, "Hey, when are the episodes coming?" I mean, pretty much everyone, like obviously everyone in a position to make money off of their fan base did. And like really the only ones that seemed to survive were DBZ abridged and Naruto abridged for a while, and then obviously Yu-Gi-Oh abridged. It's kind of crazy that
All sorts of loving like the abridged fan bases for this guy,
Another random
which
time
I thought
skip.
was
Another
awesome.
random time skip.
And
Wow,
that
I do this a
not
lot.
tooting my own horn, but it got like a lot of likes, that comment of mine. But
Oh my
um,
god, your comment got a
yeah, and
lot of
so obviously
likes.
that
Wow, that
connects
never happened
back
to anyone before.
to talking about how Yu-Gi-Oh! Bridge is coming back. Our old abridged things. You were into an abridged series for Xiaolin Showdown,
yep,
an
that
old
is
cartoon that was. I had caught it a lot on Cartoon Network. I know it started on like I think CW or like Fox or something.
yeah,
And I was doing so as I recall, it's literally been like 10 years or more.
14
I,
years really, because
yeah,
we started XSA Shaolin Showdown abridged when we were like 15, so I'm 28 now, so it's been like 13 years. It's
yeah,
crazy.
yeah. And I remember, and it's off the internet now, and I'm trying to like climb my way out of hell back into like being somewhat viewed again. But I had done and it was even a parody of a parody because I had done it kind of horribly with a camera instead of like an actual editing software. But
Yep.
I had done a Johnny Bravo bridge that got
Yep.
up to 10,000 views, which I know is not a lot these days, but back when I was like 12 or 13, that felt like
Yeah.
a ton.
Oh yeah, and
Um,
also when like the number one most subscribed YouTube channel was like 100,000, or it was Kev Jumbo back then, right? Like it was
oh,
like
really?
yeah, yeah, like I almost remember it like in order. Like the top five were like Kev Jumbo, Niga Higa, um,
Oh,
It's
yeah.
okay,
and
Max can say that
crap,
word. He can
Buck.
say
What
that
the Buck
word.
was in the top 10. Philip DeFranco was in the top 10.
Oh my God,
Uh,
Michael Buckley. I have not heard that name in a while.
yeah, like oh man, I know I'm forgetting someone. Like oh, Smosh. Smosh was always number two or number one.
Yeah.
Trading off with Kev Jumba before Niga Higa overtook both of them. Uh, yeah, like oh right, and then right after that, like there were like eras because like there was that era, the Kev Jumba Smosh Niga Higa era, and then right after that there was Ray William Johnson, and he held it for like a couple years.
Mm-hmm.
And he really pioneered sort of like this vlog style. I mean, he didn't pioneer it, but like he really pushed the daily news vlog bit. And then Niga Higa took over again, and then obviously now I feel like oh Fred, I totally jumped over Fred
Yeah.
and went straight for
The Nickelodeon star. Yeah, of
yeah,
course.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Fred,
Yeah.
Fred took it over. The Fine Brothers didn't ever have the top, but that was right around the time that PewDiePie was like ascending. And I feel like the last 8 years we've been in 5 to 8 years we've been in PewDiePie land, um, for better
I
or for
mean,
worse.
I don't know, dude. Sure. I guess, right, in terms of actual statistics, but
Yeah,
to me, PewDiePie Land was back in 2010, 2011 when he was only playing scary games like Amnesia and like some other
and
stuff like
everyone
that.
else. Yeah, the rise of the React channels.
Yeah,
Yeah, if you're talking about too many things, like there are probably too many React channels. Like me, I
that's
re
true. Yeah, yeah.
I regret, as like a massive One Piece mark, I regret not like me and my girlfriend rewatched 650 episodes of One Piece during this quarantine, and there's a part of me
Holy shit.
that obviously regrets that we didn't do a live reaction to it because React channels, especially to anime that people have already watched, like I'm guilty of this too. Like I follow like two or three One Piece React channels, and even though I'm like, this isn't really content, it's like engaging. Like
Yeah.
it's not content the way that I remember YouTube, but like it is engaging. And hey, I'm not mad at you for making money. Like some of the React channels, like pulling, like just raking it in on Patreon. And I just regret not doing it myself. I was like, oh crap, we should have definitely just live reacted to that. Like, there are certain points in the series that you can just like prepare, like especially if one of you has already seen it, you can prepare the other one and just be like, all right, cool. This is gonna make a million views because you're gonna start crying in the middle of it, and it'll get circulated throughout the ecosystem.
Yeah, dude, that's sick emotion. Yeah, dude. Um, yeah, yeah. Well, so I'm at the point now where it's like reaction channels I've noticed, reaction review have now like they've sort of evolved and transformed into like video essay channels because now everywhere you look, everything's a very
Yeah.
um, but
What?
and so funny
Yeah,
segue.
yeah. You
Oh,
haven't been listening to any Thunderfoot?
Thunderfoot. That's sort of the Sargon. That's like the Sargon of a Cod Corner, right?
Yeah, it is. He's the guy who hates. I spent like a month listening to him and Roosh V, just to get into the head of these, just to try to understand it. But yeah, I think he's the dude who hates Anita Sarkeesian for like, he was like weirdly aggressive towards her. Like, there's one thing to dislike someone, and then there's a whole other thing to base your career off of disliking one person.
And I mean, the sad factor is, I mean, it kind of works for these people, for a lot of
Oh
people
yeah,
online.
oh
But
yeah, for
yeah,
sure.
yeah, yeah, that's
So,
true. But getting away from, well, rather, segueing from the bread tubers, contra philosophy, all of them, philosophy, did recently, actually. I was very pleasantly surprised about this. Philosophy did a video that basically um, prefaces what I'm sort of politically really interested in, which is anti-work. I don't know if you follow the anti-work subreddit. Um,
Anti-woke as in anti. You're just gonna have to explain it to me.
okay, sure. So it's a lot nicer than you might think. So anti-work is basically like it's pro labor, like it's pro like the worker, but it's like anti like hustle culture and
Yeah,
anti like overwork.
yeah,
And it but it follows more so to the idea that like in this capitalist society that we find ourselves in today, that we seem to be in this headspace where we gather a lot of self-worth from how much like we are doing some kind of wage labor
yep,
instead of like making like like art or like looking after our family, stuff like that.
yeah.
um, and like I said you a few days ago, really I think the quick and dirty way to put it is that the four sort of like bastions of thought that come to mind for this stuff is Noam Chomsky, David Graeber, Mark Fisher, and Bob Black.
Uh-huh.
Now, how much have you looked into those guys, or what's your
Uh,
history with that?
uh, I definitely read them like in high school and maybe some in uni. Noam Chomsky, especially, uh, especially jumps out to me because one of my uh, high school professors, he wrote an essay that was like the unbearable whiteness of Noam Chomsky, and it was essentially taking like it wasn't like an attack piece on Noam Chomsky per se. It was just taking him to task for some of the sort of holes in his philosophical life. Like he wasn't, like in New York, there's this uh, there's this character that's this like enlightened sort of like liberal writer who also fails to self-reflect in a way that would be productive or in a it almost makes some of their writing a little disingenuous. So he was just taking him to task for that because um Noam Chomsky wasn't really looking at some of the race stuff when he was in some of his writings. I can't do the essay justice because it's been so long since I've read it, but uh, I am sort of like familiar with that school of thought, or like that school of writing. Um, it's just been a while since I've read it.
Yeah. And another aspect of anti-work, therefore, is work reducing. Like,
Hmm.
meaning like getting away from the sort of 5 hour or 5 day work week and what is it, 40-hour work week, and instead going to like 4 day work week, like 30-hour work week.
Yeah,
Um, yeah,
yeah.
um, yeah,
I,
and yeah, yep.
I mean, I can speak to it on a film level. Like, I think, and taking it a little back to YouTube and that that school of thought. A couple years ago, Freddie Wong did a podcast where he talked about, he's, his whole thing was super popular and it did so many numbers on YouTube and then on Netflix and Hulu, uh, with his people saw for 10 years. And then he would have had more cachet in the industry because they sort of look down on him, for working YouTube. But what's crazy to me is both of those, irregardless, if you don't know someone, both of those avenues require a lot of work. What he did on YouTube, that was like not even a full-time job, especially before you're getting paid. You're talking 60, 70-hour weeks where you're just churning out content, hoping enough people see it so that it becomes profitable. And then when it does become profitable, you have to maintain the same schedule in order to keep making more money. And to look at what he did over the span of 10 years and like kind of like spit in his face and go, hey, look, it's not worth anything. is like insane to me because obviously the person has work experience, but he doesn't have prestige work experience, right?
Hmm.
Or like they perceive it as him not having prestige work experience when, and like obviously I never got to the level that he was at, but I can identify that in my own work history where it's like it's kind of like dog eat dog in New York in a lot of like it can be like pretty harsh. So I can working working 16-hour days is just normal. That's just like if you're really serious about a video production and it's going to be like a big opportunity for you, you should be okay working 16 hours a day for, I did that once for a month and a half. Um, and it's like, by the end of it, like I had messed up my back, messed up my arm, and that was like a badge of honor. That was some,
Yeah.
that was something that I was supposed to take as like, oh, well, you really bled for the industry. But I'm like, also, if you had managed this properly, I wouldn't have had to do that. It doesn't make sense
Hmm.
that I had to do that.
Hmm.
Obviously, I shouldn't say that, right? Like, it's not okay to say that, but no, seriously, like,
Right. Right.
I can't tell you how many people have that same exact mentality where it's like, oh, you got to pay your dues. Like, pay your dues is like a classic example of something that a superior or someone around you will say just to like get you to overwork yourself for the sake of the
Yeah.
company. And it's yeah, and it's also this royal we, right? It's like when you're in
Hmm.
when you're in it, everyone uses the royal we. Your supervisor will use the royal we. Can we do something? When in reality, it's can you do this?
Yeah.
Irregardless of how long it's going to take you. Um,
Oh
so
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
I agree. Yeah. Well, and then that's the thing though. Completely agree. Like if this stuff ever gets out of control, like what you're talking about with where it gets so bad that you like hurt yourself. I mean that sucks. But I also did want to make the preface, of course. I mean, if anybody gets meaning out of work, and if anybody is actually does, and if anybody themselves likes to, totally overwork themselves towards a craft that they really like, I think that's all right. The sort of thing with me though with the
it's an
anti-work
expectation.
is what?
It's an expectation.
Yeah, no, that's bad. I think like it should be a thing that people sort of subjectively, personally get meaning out of, and not like impose on others. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, yeah,
I,
yeah.
again, I've never taken a job that I didn't believe in. Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
I've been very adamant about that. I do this because I enjoy it. If I really wanted to like make money, I would be in a different field.
Yeah.
um, and I would have fewer hours as a result. But
Hmm.
uh, I hear what you're saying. Like obviously it should be a subjective choice, but I think what I'm trying to say is, for a lot of people, it isn't a subjective choice. If you're not a hustler, that's in a lot of the job descriptions. If
Yeah.
it's like, oh, we need hustlers, we need self-starters, self-motivators, and all that really is code for is we need people who are going to be here at 7 a.m. and are working midnight every day, even if you're leaving at midnight because of someone else's mismanagement. And it's like there's I don't know if you've been following the cyberpunk stuff, but it comes out in that too, like especially in game development. That's a passion industry. People work it because they love it, but because of that, people can get away with lots of mismanagement like that.
Yeah. Oh no, completely. You pretty much just said what I was gonna say, right? Like it's like it shouldn't be like a wage slave thing, right?
Yeah.
And I've actually been watching a lot of Jim's new topic.
Okay.
Since we were talking about, what you've been doing with filming, as that
Yep.
was brought up in the anti-work thing. Can you elaborate on? Because I got notes here for you said you were into filming, and also you had gotten something to help you with a virtual reality project.
Oh yeah. Okay. So let's do the VR thing and then work in reverse. So the VR
Okay.
thing, so I through a few work colleagues, I managed to put together a, and I think I've talked to you about this before, but over the past couple of years, like obviously they always tell you to find your voice, right? And we've spoken on more than one occasion, sort of like about political issues, and for me, my thought process is the biggest crisis facing the country right now, especially in the social media sort of algorithm based communication space, is the loss of empathy. Um, so because of that, and because I thought empathy is this thing that we've just sort of like thrown to the wayside in favor of people parroting the ideas that we care about. I started like back in 2014. I started grinding out what could I do to generate empathy towards the things that sort of like I care about. And then last year, I had an opportunity to be a part of a group uh, working on. Um, it's called the Ocean Memory Project, and they're working on around this premise of does the ocean have memories? Does the ocean retain memories? Right? But there was this grant proposal period where people would propose for like seed grants, and myself and my group, we sort of my co or like my the main lead on this is Kathy Foley Meyer, but I sort of spoke to her and talked to her about my VR ideas, which was just that, and it dovetailed nicely with her idea, which is she wanted to explore what happened to the bodies of or what happened to the enslaved people that or that were thrown overboard during the Middle Passage. And
Mm,
initially I thought, okay, that's interesting, but when you start to think about it, you're like, wait, over the course of 200, 300 years, you have this giant biomass of that just was deposited in the ocean, right? Like
yeah.
there's so many implications to what happened to those people. And in the grand scheme of things, like that section of the ocean, especially speaking to the scientists like in the group, that section of the ocean is huge. It's larger than we can even think. So even 3 million human bodies is still like a speck, right?
Hmm.
But it's not a speck because it's not a speck because it's also like built into the fabric of our the historical context. Like it still plays out till today, right? There's
Right.
the Confederate dude with the flag in the Capitol building. That's like a direct tie back to this, right?
Sure.
It still plays out in the public consciousness. So,
Hmm.
and speaking to her about that, I sort of explained that I've been developing this VR system to sort of treat VR the same way that um, early filmmakers or early animators sort of treated film and animation, which is we need to come up with the mechanisms to leverage what VR does well. And what VR does well is empathy. It teaches us how to literally see from the perspective of someone else. And understanding human psychology enough to like put that together into a package that lets you see through the eyes of someone else going through an experience that maybe your ancestors never had to go through. I think that opens the door to conversation more than, you know, someone just going up to you and trying to parrot to you history when you were asleep through history class anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
So, like we're resistant to ideas that are outside our sphere of influence. Like, and I'm also thinking about it on the reverse side as well. Like obviously I'm black, so I have a
Hmm.
bias here, but like I'm also thinking of it on the reverse side. There's a wonderful book titled White Trash that like opened my eyes to some. It doesn't sound like it would, but people and
Waste people. Interesting.
yeah, so there was this concept of waste people tracing back to Europe, and waste people were, there was no color assigned to them, but essentially waste land was undeveloped land. So when they sent people over to America initially, it was considered a wasteland. Like nowadays we're like, oh, beautiful forest, vast vistas, that's beautiful, but it's like,
Hmm.
no, that's a wasteland because this land is uncivilized. It doesn't have cities. It doesn't have anything that grounds it in this sort of like godly organization, right? So
Oh wow, so Wasteland actually has this incredibly like, what is it? Imperial implication.
Exactly, or if you choose to believe that Christianity is imperial by nature, or the way it was deployed was
Well, just
imperial by
you were
nature.
talking about how the land is unsettled,
Yeah,
empire or civilization hasn't tapped
yeah,
into it yet.
yeah.
Yeah,
And then, obviously later that ties into Manifest Destiny and stuff like that. But
yeah.
um, it was sort of perceived that your job as a slave master or slave owner was to keep that person working, because if not for that, they would just revert to their waste habits, right? Like they would just go back to lounging around in the savannah because that's their uncivilized brain working. And you teaching them you teaching them a hard day's work was like part of, it's this was all sort of like constructed. But anyway, I've gotten a little too into the history. uh, um but
Well, it's funny you're sort of tapping back into some of more like aspects and beliefs I have regarding like anti-work.
yeah,
Like yeah, like laziness. You mentioned like laziness and sort of reverting back to the lounging thing, and I know you're talking about what the slave masters thought, but it's
but
an interesting thing because I personally, what's your take on laziness as like a real or false thing that exists? Because I feel like
well,
people have this. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, I think I'm whatever I say is just going to preempt what you're saying, so you might as well keep talking.
Well, it's just, as an anti-work person, I feel like laziness actually isn't like real. I think unless you're in like a vegetative state, right? Unless there's
Yeah,
something like wrong with you that should be treated or cured or helped along, like, um, no one is really like lazy. Like no one is super frozenly idle. Like people are always going to be like finding stuff to do.
yeah,
So this idea that like people are just lazy unless they have the sort of threat of work, lest they become like, homeless because they can't afford their living,
yeah.
to
I
me is obviously disgusting. But yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think that is definitely born out of slavery, in my opinion, um, and born out of what I was just talking about. Because
Yeah, yeah.
it's like there we know just factually, right? Like we know that there is a need for rest, right? Like in every and it's weird. It's the contradiction is like annoying to me because it's like in every other discipline or in every other facet of life, we understand that if you're working out, we understand that rest is important. If you're if if you study music, you understand that the space in between notes is just as important, if not more important than the notes themselves, right? Like you under scientific discoveries. There's multiple scientific discoveries that don't happen at the chalkboard. They actually happen after you've left the chalkboard and you're like doing your laundry or something. Um, this idea of disengaging from work to make a more productive worker is like littered throughout all of our literature, and it seems to like the productivity rising with obviously slavery and the industrial revolution. I think there's it's a fallacy that sort of like it feeds it's good for businesses in theory. Like if you're micromanaging everything your employees do, yes, obviously you're going to want to squeeze them for every last second that you can. But if you look at the big picture, it really just doesn't make sense to treat people that way because you deal with higher turnover, which causes you to have to spend more money rehiring people anyway. Treating
Yeah.
hu- treating human beings as interchangeable parts, I think, is a long term is setting you up for long-term failure. That's why like when you look at obviously again I use game companies as an example, but it's like the more certain companies, BioWare, Cyberpunk, or not Cyberpunk, CD Projekt Red, and as these companies get corporatized, um,
Ugh.
the
We didn't mean it. And now it's time to go to a little break of intermission of break of intermission of break of intermission. I really love podcasts.
I love podcasts.
No, dude. No, dude. I love podcasts. A video productions teacher, and she had us working with Adobe,
Yeah.
and I've never actually set foot anywhere near Sony Vegas Pro,
It
so that's
was.
interesting.
I think it was just easier to understand, but maybe it's just because it was what I learned on. But I think it just worked really organically. So it was disappointing when the whole industry moved over to Premiere and Final Cut and now DaVinci Resolve, and I'm just like,
So is that
what's up?
is that the program now that all the YouTubers are using, like is like Adobe and Premiere?
Yeah,
I
most
use
of the
Adobo to
YouTubers use
salt my
Premiere.
fish.
Oh wow.
DaVinci Resolve is what most people are going to use for color grading anyway. Uh, Even if they use Premiere to do like the initial cut, like on the high-end studios, they'll use DaVinci Resolve to do their color. And then I'm sure some YouTubers are still using like Final Cut because Final Cut Pro is still just, it was the industry standard for so long for people that it's probably Premiere, Final Cut Pro, and like DaVinci that are like most popular on YouTube.
Well, I know those cost like a lot of money, so I'll have to
Yeah,
keep those on the horizon, put those on a wish list somewhere. Yeah.
Premiere is, yeah, it's a subscription service, so it sucks. Final Cut is expensive, but actually DaVinci Resolve is pretty affordable. Like pro tip, if you want to get it on the, you can go on eBay, buy a dongle for like 150, $200. You just plug it to your computer, and you can even get the light version for free. Um, and it's like an industry standard. Like most of our workflows at work, we use DaVinci Resolve, so you can get the light version, and it's actually the most affordable one. You pay if you want to just pay for it outright, you pay $300. You have it for the rest of your life. But if you don't want to do that, you can pick up a dongle off of eBay, and it's like a little USB dongle you keep connected to your computer, and as long as it's connected to your computer, it'll be activated. Um,
How do you spell that? Dongle? What?
Dongle. So you just
Okay,
type in
okay.
DaVinci Resolve dongle into eBay. It's gonna come
Oh,
up.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, the USB
Wow.
dongle will show up. Sometimes people will sell it like open box for like $140, and that's 50% off the program right there. And
Yeah.
as long as you have the dongle, you have access to DaVinci Resolve Studio. So,
Heck yeah. So, continuing with the podcast right along here.
yep,
I wanted to go back. I know like earlier I was like, let's keep it, try to take a step back and go to a more lighthearted extension. But I
topic.
think it's okay to like, yeah, it's okay to. I think now though it's okay to delve back into that.
Hmm.
Um, so two things I wanted to like finish talking on, and then like totally have you back in like a future episode is you mentioned that you were a history buff,
Yep.
um, and I have a bit of a personal uh, curriculum vitae with that. And then I wanted to clear up earlier, because and I know your reaction wasn't obviously that like nasty at all. But like I guess I made the mention I was like libertarian left, and
Yeah.
you took interest with that, and I just wanted to clear up. Obviously, obviously like labels can be so dirtying and muddying with
Hmm.
conversation. So I just wanted to like totally, and I wonder what yours is. Give out sort of my current PPP, personal political platform here.
Yep.
My whole thing with me is like I believe, and then I'm gonna make another note because I know this is probably a thing many people are gonna ask, especially you. Um, my whole thing is I believe in like free to highly affordable housing, healthcare, education, and like foods in certain like contexts. Like I know
Yeah.
you know the question is like what the fuck do you mean by free food? But it's like South Korea for instance gave a lot of their residents to like stay indoors during the quarantine,
Yeah.
like a package of like some MREs and shit. We didn't get that here, right?
Yeah.
Um, And kids in elementary school now are apparently going through what's called student lunch debt, or like middle school and high school education. I would say also UBI, I think, can exist on top of that. I think it's, a lot of people tend to believe it's sort of one way or the other. It's
Yeah,
like either give everybody UBI or give everybody free shit. And I think like it
you
can
can do
be
both.
like, I think it can do both. And then, of course, the thing that comes up is I'm obviously pretty heavily materially focused here, and so the thing is, are you like a class reductionist, Ryan Sierra? And it's like, no. um, I understand, like, in order to, you have to package this stuff in a cultural thing,
Hmm.
and you have to, the way that you mobilize people too is through culture, and primarily in the first place, the only, you know, famous last words to say the only, but like oftentimes the reason that gets a lot of us going with this stuff is because in the first place it was a social um, fucker upper. Like when housing crisis happened, right? I mean, I'm sure that screwed with a lot of people's social lives.
Hmm.
So there's this huge social, cultural aspect to it too that I'm not trying to disregard. Like in the ways of race and the differences in the sexes.
Yeah.
Um, in fact, to me, what happens with it though is I guess I'm just it's in a way a naivety because I look at the material things and go, oh, well, obviously, if those material things get solved, the social stuff will follow right along. And I don't even think about how, like, apparently there's something called conservative socialism, which like throws me for a loop. Like, I'm like,
That's
the fuck? And it's
fun.
people who love socialism but like don't like gays and stuff. It's annoying. Um, but because when I think about, like, for instance, free healthcare, I think about how that could radically benefit trans people, trans folk,
Yeah.
because it's like obviously, getting not for all of them, but for the big demographic of them that have like gender dysphoria.
Yeah.
I mean, getting the gender reassignment surgery will not cost you an arm and a leg, right? If you have free healthcare.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's my personal political platform:
Yeah.
is free basic amenities. Um, because going back to the anti-work thing, I don't think that it's so free that you have to take whoever the hell will take you on the job market. And as we're
Hmm.
seeing these days, I don't know if you've been looking at the job market, like with kind of outside of the film world, but it's shitty.
It sucks. Yeah.
It's really it's really bad. And it's funny because, a lot of people older than us, and how
It's
old are you
really
at this
shit,
point?
and all the companies have
28.
ATSs and are so
28. Oh
fucking
wow.
entitled.
Yeah.
Only 4 years older than me. Wow. Um, it's so bad, and a lot of people who are like in the Gen X and the Boomer generation don't like see it. How like Gen
Yeah.
X and what is it? Or not Gen X, Gen Z and Millennials at this point, we're like, yeah,
We're
nothing good is
screwed.
gonna happen again for us.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So what is your PPP? What's your personal political platform?
Uh, I don't know if I have a platform per se. Like, I'd argue it's just it. Like, to sum it up in a nutshell, I feel like I want the things that I was sold on. I want this. I want I want to live in a country that is this meritocracy that people claimed it was. Um,
Hmm.
I want people to have equal opportunity because again, this idea. I guess I'm stuck on this idea of meritocracy, but
Hmm.
this idea that as a human being, we all start off with the same options and the same abilities,
Hmm.
and we to each as they eventually earn in their lives, or like you put in the work, you get the reward. The cream eventually rises to the top. All of those like platitudes, right?
Hmm.
um I think it's that indecency. It's like I'm not the kind of person who believes that it should be a full communism where the government just decides what everyone does. And
Well, it's command economy, but yeah, yeah.
yeah, like yeah, you're right. It is, but in the context of like the American consciousness, communism means
Hmm.
the
Yeah,
government. Yeah, the government
yeah.
decides what you do. Um,
Right.
but you're right. You're right to correct me on that.
Ooh.
But what so that's my whole thing is treat people like people, do the bare, like, not the bare minimum, but do what is necessary are
We
wonderful,
interrupt this
for
program to bring you a
after
dramatic
all
read.
it's a matter of dying. Yet a day comes when a man notices or says that he is 30. He takes his place in it. He admits that he stands at a certain point on a curve that he acknowledges having to travel to its end. He belongs to time. Thus he asserts his youth, but simultaneously he situates himself in relation to time. Measure
Thank you, and
that
welcome back to the
benefits the group,
podcast. Hope you liked that dramatic
um,
read.
in the proper context benefits the group, but also like moves the like n- never the individual at the expense of the group, essentially. Um,
Hmm.
if someone has, but it's like, for me it's like at extremes. Like, I don't think millionaire I'm not one of the people that would say that millionaires shouldn't exist. um, if we reach a point as a society where it really becomes unsustainable to have millionaires, or certain class structures are just too fundamentally broken to sustain it, I have no problem with people breaking that up. Like, I really do see progress as the end goal. Like,
Hmm.
as a collective society, we should be pushing science, and we should be pushing ourselves forward to being like, I honestly believe that we're like 20 to 30 years behind where we could be with certain things,
Oh, of
because of
course. Yeah.
because of because of semantics, not just social issues, but just straight up science. Like, when Neil deGrasse Tyson brought this up, it is like they wanted to fund a large hadron collider in America like 10 to 15 years before the one that got built did.
Hmm.
And it's like, we're holding ourselves back because we're like fighting over these semantics. My issue,
Hmm.
you referred to them as like the material things, but I have, like, I think the exact the opposite. Actually, first, my reaction to you saying liberal, um, or liberal leaning libertarian, is because of the Koch brothers, and I was just curious what your thoughts are, your general thoughts are on the because my understanding of the libertarian movement was that it came up with the Tea Party, and that it was heavily funded by the Koch brothers. And knowing who those guys are, I go, okay, I can see why some of the, like, I agree with some of these ideas, especially when what's his name from Penn and Teller talks about them. But then there were other elements of that I'm like, oh, okay, the Koch brothers definitely funded this because they want people to, be on their side when it comes to certain policy decisions. And then the second thing that I reacted to, as far as what you referred to as like material social issues, um, I definitely am one of those people who's of the belief that, or who's of the opinion that when it comes to things like sexism and racism, those are fundamentally tied to the class issues.
Hmm.
Like, they're inextricably linked with the class issues that I think we both agree on. So when it comes to understanding how to unravel those class issues, you can't do one without the other. Like, if you're having a conversation about the economy and about fixing the economy, or fixing the way that classes interact with each other, you have to have a conversation with racism, at least in this country, because racism is embedded into the fabric of this country. Like, we would not have had the Industrial Revolution if not for the, economic windfall that came from slavery. Like,
Hmm.
the we're taught to see the Revolution as this like huge scientific boom, and yes, that's part of what it was. But the other major part that sort of like gets written out of the books and isn't really talked about, but when you take it in its full context, it's like it's the same idea. It's a very similar idea to like, economic, like, destruction and reconstruction, right? Like, it's, if you have an industry that becomes obsolete, it's going to be deconstructed into its components parts, and it's going to be reconstructed in another industry. So the flip phone, like the flip phone industry with the Blackberries and everything, deconstructed, and all those factories ended up being repurposed to smartphones. That's like a really easy one
Mm-hmm.
to grab. Slavery got deconstructed at some point, and it reconstructed into the Industrial Revolution. All of that capital, all of the capital generated during slavery ended up into the factories, um, and it didn't. That money changed hands, but it didn't change who was in control of the factories, and didn't change attitudes. And I think, especially in America, it's important to understand racism and sexism within that context, because society perceives it as at large. That's why a major part of this most recent sort of nationalist base about, make America great again, is about returning to the 50s, when you would argue with most Americans nowadays, and they're like, well, the 50s, like they'd be like, oh, well, racism was bad, but we as a country overcame it. But in reality, half of the country decided that it was bad, and the other half was just forced to go along with it because they didn't have like they were like, oh, we can't really argue with it, right? Like the same thing with certain progresses in women's rights, and it's like you can't take one without the other. You're not going to dismantle the class system without understanding racism and sexism and how those are interwoven, because what you'll end up with is a class system that only benefits one certain sections of the government, like we did with the New Deal back in the 19 or like right after the war. We did the New Deal, and the only provisions that prevented who would be prevented from benefiting from the VA loans and certain loans that were guaranteed under the New Deal was that you were not an agricultural worker. Now we can say that was the 40s, but we've been doing that up through the 60s and 70s. So the agricultural worker thing was important because if you 90, it was like in the 90, it was like 95% of all agricultural workers, or 95% of all black people were working in agriculture or working in home care. So if you put a provision in the New Deal that says that you are not going to be able to get any of these home loans or any of these VA loans if you are in these industries, then you don't need to say, hey, black people or certain types of women don't need to apply. You can just say, hey, yeah, we're making this is only for these other people. So you end up in a situation where you're doing things at a government level that are supposed to be for the entire country, but you're really only doing it for a section of the country, which is actually the conservative platform in 2021, which is that the liberals want to do stuff for all of the minorities, but they don't want to do anything for white people, when in actuality, the history of America has never done anything strictly for minorities. Even the affirmative action program, when you look at it, has largely benefited women, a lot of them being white women, over people of color. So again, that's why, like, for at least for my politics, those things are intertwined. Like I believe, I believe in a level playing field for people. So that's equity over equality. The full context of history for people understanding things. I believe in community-based action programs. So not just programs that see people as an individual, but see how people tend to work as a group, right? Like it's if this community is more likely to put money here, then I'm going to put money here. Like you can't look at people and say, oh, they're on drugs because this is the kind of person they are as an individual. And again,
Yeah.
America under America understands these things. They understand statistics. Like again, even Tucker Carlson made the argument that we can't look at the angry capitalist writers and see them as one monolithic group. Like he understands that for that group. But if you're talking about Antifa or if you're talking about BLM, oh yeah, that's all of them. That's all the liberals. They're all, I saw one guy throw a brick through a window. That's literally all of them. So
Hmm.
reserving that nuance to understand, okay, hey, there are certain groups of people that do just want to tear shit up, but if we take the whole of this group and see what's wrong with it and treat it as a systemic issue, like I'm all about treating systemic issues over treating the individual, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, this is totally elaborating on this word I'm about to use is totally for like the next episode you come on, but there's a lot of what's called atomization in our society today, which is like this hyper individualism, which I
yeah,
think actually hurts the individual more than like group dynamics.
yeah, for sure.
Um,
I
but
mean, it's
but
the American dream. The American dream was always meant to be an opium for the masses, right? Like it's
yeah,
you can be like me one day, which again to the point of we talked earlier about.
I'm just in utter enamorment with podcasts.
No, 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 no. I am over the moon with podcasts.
Dude, do you really love podcasts right
Oh,
now?
I'm insane about podcasts right now.
Oh my god, dude, insanity. I was watching a podcast the other day about insanity. Oh my god. There we
Will not be. So why not
Yeah.
play instead of playing for the lottery, why not play for, the mortgage? Like play for
Yeah.
what is immediately in front of you, and you will put yourself in a better position to you know,
Well, it's
win
like
the lottery.
raise your floor.
Yeah,
Work to raise the floor instead of working to try and chase after the ceiling, I guess.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Don't chase after lightning. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But going back, so let's see. So you were like libertarian equals Koch brother. So here's the thing. I guess misunderstanding. When I say libertarian, I just mean I'm referring to that four coordinate plane political compass meme,
Yeah.
where it's like there's like right authoritarian, right libertarian, left libertarian,
Hmm.
and what that really just means is just like how much I guess like government you want to really intervene and stuff outside of what it should just kind of do in a sense, unless you want to be truly stateless, which
Yeah.
is which I is the appropriate definition for anarchy,
Yeah.
not just anomy. Most people need to use the word anomy more often when they refer to anarchy. But anyway, the thing is, um, yeah, I'm not. I don't. So, unfortunately for you there for that thing, I don't know a lot about the Koch brothers. I don't mean libertarian like that. I just mean libertarian in the sense of like I'm more of like an anarchist than I am like a Stalinist or a Marxist Leninist, if
I
that
hear
makes
what.
sense.
Yeah, yeah, that does make sense.
Yeah.
Um,
Um. Yeah. I have that leaning instead of currently. I would safely say that I'm just a progressive. Because I think a lot of progressives, isn't it sort of the progressive belief to want to like cut down on work too? Like, aren't progressive? I mean, back in the
yeah,
day, like decades ago, the progressives were the one who got us to the 40-hour work week.
yeah.
Um. Yeah.
Gen and labor unions and all that good stuff that we take for granted now. But those dirty liberals, they're on the wrong side of history now. um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, progressive. I would argue, like the libertarian platform, I think was partially funded by the Koch brothers. They're
Yeah,
just like,
I don't mean to identify with like the libertarian like political party. I mean
yeah,
libertarian in the sense of that. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. I hear what you're saying. Smaller government, more personal autonomy, but also like common sense social systems, right? Like
Yeah.
it makes sense that everyone should have the right to an education.
Mhm.
There's no argument amongst people on that. Like
Mhm.
people having the right to an education. Like I feel like we might argue about the cake thing. Um,
About the what thing?
the cake thing.
The cake?
The gay cake thing where,
Oh.
yeah,
Well, I mean, no, I mean, I don't really. So
it's
that
like,
go. So it depends how big. Okay, it depends how big that business was.
yeah,
If they were a corporation, I think they should have given to that gay couple, or if they were even like a medium sized business, they should have given to the gay couple because it's like um, I personally see no difference between corporations and the government. I think they're the same thing.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, functionally, they are the same thing.
Yeah, yeah. So if the government, right, has the right or is forced to have the right to make sure that gays have the right to like be served equally, then
Yeah.
like yeah. If it was a small business,
So my
fuck them.
argu
But yeah.
my argument is always just government subsidies. If you want government subsidies,
Hmm.
and if you're going to benefit from the collective will of the community, then you need to follow this thing. So it's like if that,
Yeah,
uh,
I agree. Yeah.
it's the same. It's essentially the same argument for gay marriage. It's not a matter of religion. It's a financial communal matter. It's like gay people should have the right to get married because everyone who has the right to get married get, tax benefits from it.
Hmm.
Not because like if you don't believe in gay marriage, that's fine. It's just, you shouldn't be able to prevent people from getting gay married. Like
Yeah.
no
Yeah.
one's forcing you to gay marry people in your church.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, so
Um. Yeah. No. Totally. Um. Let's see. So let's see. Then you went on to talk about.
treat one, you wouldn't be fully treating the issue that you're trying to solve because what's going to happen is if you dealt with the underlying capital issue, you're still not dealing with the issue of people not being allowed in certain places or not having access to certain types of people that may give them opportunities that they wouldn't otherwise have, because of being black or a person of color or whatever. So
Right.
yeah, my bigger argument is more about it is closer to what you're saying about the Ouroboros. We've gotten to a point in 2021 where it's hard to see where one starts and what the other ends, but if the treatment doesn't take both into account, you'll just get what has happened over time, which is starting with the Civil War, which is maybe one of the earliest examples of America trying to sort of reckon with itself on a racial and a economic level. At the end of the Civil War, 40 acres and a mule was promised to the slaves, right?
Hmm.
That was an economic issue, that is a capital issue, that was to create an equity between these people who were slaved and indentured for as however long as they were. But obviously, those reparations were never paid back. But in spite of that, reparations were paid to the slave owners, which who already had a leg up in terms of capital.
Yep. Yeah.
And then on top of that, and all of that would have been almost fine. I mean, obviously, it's not fine because you widen the gap between them, even though you gave the slaves freedom in theory, and people were running for office, people were establishing themselves in the society. But the thing that Ted Cruz loves to bring up is the last time we had a discussion about election or voter. The last time we had a discussion about voter integrity in 1876, and how that was really important, but and how fruitful that was for the formulation of the nation. And I'm like, you mean those discussions that directly led to the rise of Jim Crow and the voter suppression that allowed Jim Crow to proliferate for over 100 years? Again,
Jesus. Yeah.
when you talk about these things without bringing in the full social context, you open the door for this kind of thing where it's like we're talking about voter suppression and making everyone wants voting to be stable, right? We want it to be
Hmm.
safe and we want it to be secure. But when you're talking about voting and you're evoking uh, voter discussion that directly led to the rise of Jim Crow, that is totally different than just wanting to reform and make the American voting system better. Um, the American voting system has been designed for over 150 years to immiserate people of color and minorities. That's not like a feeling, that's just a fact, right?
Yeah.
So that's my larger point. We have these like touchstones throughout American history where you can look at people using socially neutral language that we've seen time and again ends up just immiserating people who are not, of the dominant class. And the dominant class in America is white and male. That's just factual. So that's what,
I mean, class. You mean as well, like like upper middle and like rich.
yeah, I mean, however you want to like parse it, like whatever you want to say is the dominant, the dominant figure in American class politics is white and
Yeah.
male. I think it's
Yeah.
okay to
No.
say that.
Rich white male cis hetero. Right.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I understand the, the gender stuff, like I get it. Um, but it's also like, just to help people understand it, it's just like, oh, you're like the poor, the interests of the poor white male and the interests of the rich white male are aligned in that one can become the, or like the rich, the poor white male aspires to become the rich white male. That, it's like cl I see what you're saying with like there are class hierarchies amongst white males, and that is a conversation.
So then you went on to talk about a lot of the your take on like the sort of social versus material, and obviously you've went on to describe yourself as an intersectionalist, I guess, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think that's fair.
yeah. Um, I would say I am too. It's just I'm still getting the hang of this stuff. I'm
Yeah.
still like learning, and I'm trying to learn every day. It's so basically again, I agree that like you have to frame this stuff culturally, and because it does wreak havoc socially anyway, right? I mean, people can't necessarily have a good social world or a good like culture if they're materially in squalor, and but the interesting thing is yeah, see, I'm having a hard time even introducing this because it's so crazy. It's like you basically say that capitalism is reinforced by racism and sexism. And I know a lot of people have that idea, but to me it just seems like an Ouroboros, man, and I don't know how to get out of that because it's like if you think about it, sure, like capitalism seems to be reinforced by like
Hmm.
the prejudice-isms, but then like the prejudice-isms are also reinforced by capitalism too.
Yeah.
Like it just seems like a snake eating its tail, right? And
Yeah.
so I know like, you know, there seems to be this sense, and again, I understand like you have to culturally frame this stuff in order to mobilize people to tear it down, but like it just seems like an Ouroboros to me, as opposed to one or the other really underlying it. Like you said that sexism and the racism underlied capitalism, but I feel like at times I often notice that it's sometimes it's the other way around, and sometimes it is that the social injustices reinforce the economic system, but sometimes I think the economic system reinforces the social injustices because it's like um like for instance, right? It's like capitalism, everything is a market commodity. Nothing is this amenity that's like given as a right.
Yeah.
Except of course for like, maybe public education, but even then parts of
Hmm.
that are like, marketized. Um, but what happens though is when that's the premise of your society, that starts to affect like certain groups of people over others.
Yeah.
Um, like the whole thing with
But
what really got me upset during the pandemic was I think there was this sort of part where a lot of like black people were getting evicted out of their apartments because they couldn't meet rent and they were
yeah.
just thrown out into the pandemic, and I was like, this is fucking terrible. But what seemed to me like the underlying issue that was reinforcing that racism and disproportionate attack on blacks was the fact that in the first place a house had to be paid for. You know what I mean? Like the fact that a house was this market commodity, if that makes sense. So anyway, you were
Yeah.
gonna say?
Yeah, I was gonna say I think my overall point wasn't necessarily that um, it's racism and sexism underlying capitalism. It's more that in order to deal with one, you kind of have to deal with the other at the same time. And
Oh yeah, yeah.
my bigger my issue is with the way the conversation usually skews to teaching one to talking about them in sort of like an agnostic sense.
Hmm.
So it's like, oh, when we talk about capitalism, we're strictly talking about the system, and the system is amoral. But the fact of the matter is, the system is implemented by people, and those people have desires and whims and prejudices, and you need to treat those prejudices as if you're trying to fix anything within the system, you need to treat those prejudices as you treat the structural economic instability, right? So, like the example you just used about um, black people being evicted during COVID, I would argue that that is a multi-stage issue where yes, having access to funds and needing funds to do that and are an issue, but also historically and culturally, black people are more likely to be let go or furloughed. People of color were more likely to be let go or furloughed during COVID. One, they were less likely to own the companies that are in charge of those decisions too. Um, right? And
Hmm.
then historically, they were no, you really don't understand. I love podcasts. Podcasts. Generally avoid having that conversation because I'm like, well, the point I'm making shouldn't make this group feel bad.
Hmm.
The point I'm making is just factual,
Yeah.
um, and it's not to say that your life struggles are somehow um, not worth anything. They're just it's what is the quote? It's like I'm not saying that your life isn't hard. I'm just saying your skin color wasn't something that made it hard for you.
That's no, that's true. No, that's true. That no, completely agree. I know, like, so yeah, no, because obviously I got skin in the game, right? Because I'm lower middle class actually, and I don't know. There's like different like words for lower middle class. It's kind of like the whole like where do the years fall with the generations? Because it's like with lower middle class, sometimes you'll just be. Sometimes people will call you middle class just because and then other times they'll call you working class.
Mhm.
But
Oh,
yeah, it's so.
don't get me started on working class. Like because I'm also like a word nerd, and I'm like to describe working class is a term that's only ever used to describe uh, the white middle or lower middle class, which is
Mhm.
insanely racist.
So I agree. Let's see. Yeah, no. Whenever like Fox News or whenever right wingers try to co-opt and recuperate like like class conflict, you should definitely have that's a red flag, right? You should like be on high alert whenever like Tucker Carlson talks about the common man getting
he
screwed over.
he
It's
don't-
like what? Yeah, yeah,
he failed up.
yeah, yeah,
I don't mind being I mean obviously I mind being oppressed, but like you go through thinking these oppressors are these geniuses. Dude legit is an idiot. He just failed up because he
yeah,
knew people. Like
yeah.
that's disappointing. I'm like bring up your like oppression game. Be better. Be
Right.
smarter.
But one thing though, and I'm sure you don't want this either, maybe. But like my sort of concern, sort of, and I know this often comes off disingenuous because social issues are important,
Hmm.
but like my kind of concern though, if people get too deep in the weeds of like idpol, is that we try to go towards like rainbow capitalism, you know, and I don't want rainbow capitalism, right? Like I want.
What describe rainbow capitalism for me.
Like, have you ever heard the meme of like more gay Syrian drone strikers? Like like the sort of idea, yeah, the sort of
Yeah.
idea of like, a society that's still, you know, exploitative and imperialist and invading and expansive and hyper capitalist, but like you just it's now it has more like diversity to it, but it still is profoundly economically unequal. I believe wasn't it Fred Hampton is his name who said like I don't want to fight white capitalism with black capitalism. I want to fight it with black socialism.
Oh yeah, I
I
am
believe.
a huge fan of Mr. Fred Hampton. Yeah, I mean, in his Rainbow Coalition, I hear you. I don't want to, I don't want to fight white capitalism with black capitalism, and that's why they killed him. Oh, sorry, excuse me. That is
Yeah,
why
I
that is why he ended up in a gunfight while he was unconscious in his bed.
yeah.
Um, Sorry, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist here, saying that
Well,
he
I mean, COINTELPRO, I think, was an official thing, right?
it was
Yeah,
official. There was documentation, but
yeah.
officially he got into a gunfight with the cops. Um,
While
he,
asleep.
exactly, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
He was very accomplished. Um,
Apparently.
but yeah, I agree with that. I think, and this is the problem with the level of discourse, because I think that is like, as someone from a third world country, um, who was born in a third world country, that was immiserated by America and continues to be sort of taken advantage of by America. I think if you look at the Democratic platform right now, outside of certain Democrats, it is exactly that, rainbow capitalism.
Yeah. Oh, it's
It
it's like republicanism, but not like out of control, like the Republicans are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's been one of my biggest frustrations. I'm like, Joe Biden is conservative. I don't understand how anyone looks at this man and sees a socialist. Um,
Hmm.
and dealing with the immediate threats of, well, we're heading towards capitalism as usual. Maybe we need to first have a conversation about the things that we're already fucking up on, and then the secondary conversation will be about, oh, hey, we also just can't continue to be, and it doesn't have to be secondary as in it happens like, after. It could be happening at the same time, but as long as people are on the same page about understanding that we're not trying to continue to be this America that oppresses everyone around the globe. Um, and it's like it's hard to have both of those conversations simultaneously with certain types of people, because they're going to look at it and say, "Hey, what do you mean? That makes it sound like America's the bad guy." Right? Like
Hmm.
you don't want to alienate people whose understanding of American politics is more superficial than yours. I
Hmm.
think it's important to take the steps that the most people can understand, um, the most readily upfront, which is why, I was very against the defund the police terminology, even though in the spirit of what they were saying, I agreed with,
Hmm.
because you can take that and you can demonize it immediately. When you say defund the police and the right conservatives run with it, they're telling all of these, the New York City Police Department is very diverse. If you tell those people, hey, defund the police, you're also destabilizing a lot of communities of color, if because the first people who are going to get fired are people of color.
Hmm.
So you need to look at that, and you need to look at how to align, um, for lack of a better term right now, white interests with what you're doing, because we're not a country of just people of color. We're a country of like multitudes, and I think it's hard for a lot of people, and I understand. I think I'm a firm believer in justifiable anger, and if you're angry because you've experienced racism or sexism throughout your life, I have no right to take that away from you. Whereas everything in him ought to reject it. That revolt of the flesh is the absurd.
All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in to Too Many Cast podcast. This has been Ryan Sierra, and
Max Marcellus, thanks for having me.
Yeah, and we're totally gonna have to get you on a second episode sometime in the future because there's obviously just been so many things have been not necessarily left unsaid, but definitely could elaborate on them because it seems like we are just two choirs preaching at each other here, and it would be great if we totally just laid a bunch of stuff out.
Yeah,
Um,
I should be able to. I'm gonna try to get Alessio on if you ever. He was Cat Kafka, but I'll see if he's available because he's like a screenwriter and he's amazing.
the
Um,
famous the guy who wrote the Die Verwandlung or the transformation where the dude turns into a bug. The,
yes.
yeah, Franz Kafka. But yeah, but yeah. Alrighty. Um, you take care of yourself.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. It was dope. Thank you.
Heck yeah, man.